At this point, I would like to call upon the program chair of the Arlington Historical Society, Jen Jablonski, who will tell us about what we're going to see and hear tonight. Jen.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. Tonight you are going to hear from Lloyd Wolf, who is an award-winning photographer who has worked with the whose work has been collected in the Corcoran Museum of Art, the Library of Congress, the Museum of Jewish Heritage, and American University in Cairo, among numerous other institutions. His work has been exhibited in over 100 national and international exhibitions. Mr. Wolf has worked on assignment for the Washington Post magazine, the National Geographic Explorer, People, Vogue, NIH, and many other publications and organizations. He has received a National Endowment for the Arts Survey grant in 1980 to document Arlington, Virginia. And tonight we're going to talk about one of those projects. The Columbia Pike Documentary Project is a team of photographers and interviewers that have portrayed the contemporary life of people and sites along the exceptionally ethnically diverse and rapidly changing Columbia Pike corridor in Arlington, Virginia. Columbia Pike is one of the most culturally mixed neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. metro area, and indeed in the world. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lloyd Wolf because he can tell you much more about this project and about Columbia Heights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, and I want to give a thanks to the Historical Society for having us here. And I want to let you know one of the other photographers of the team, Dewey Tron, has just walked in. And so when we get to the question and answer period, he can help us with that process. I'm going to start just explaining the project. I'm going to leave the slideshow running. It loops. There's a lot of pictures. There's 5 of us who are photographers for it. I'm the chief photographer. There's Dewey Tron, Paula Endo, who co-founded the project with me, and Zhang Mimi Ho, we just call her Mimi, and Alexandra La Cueva, who's our newest person, who just walked in. So wave. Back there is Alexandra. This project has been going on in bits, actually, since '79. Paula and I taught together in Arlington. Paula Endo and I taught together in Arlington, and we wanted to document the whole county. That work became a catalog, and it's stored here in the library, in the historical collection. They keep changing the name. It used to be the Virginia Room. It's got another name now. And Paula then founded something called the Columbia Heights West Teen Photo Project that Dewey and Mimi came out of. I volunteered in. John Andelin, who's here, was one of the major people involved with that also. And it kept moving forward. A book was published at that time called Portraits of the Pike by the Arlington Urban Alternatives Foundation. And then somewhere along the line, Paula and Todd Endo, her husband, and I thought, the real change that's going on, and that what we know is what's in the community, is happening along Columbia Pike. I've lived in the county since the early 70s. I grew up in Northern Virginia when there were, some people who know me have heard me say this a few times, when there were 3 ethnic groups in Northern Virginia. There were Southern white, Southern black, and government workers. And my family was in the latter. I went to Jeb Stuart High School. We had a few Cubans and a few Jews and a couple of embassy kids from other countries. That was it. And the food reflected it. Now we have, hundreds of languages in our school system and in the community. About 10 years ago, Paul and I began to think we needed to do something really solidly on the Pike, that what was happening with the influx of the immigration was unusual. That I had a personal wake-up call at a community festival at Tyrell Hill Park in Columbia Heights West, where it was just off the charts diverse, and it was fun to photograph. And then at that point, we began to kind of put things together. And we thought this is something to notice, to celebrate. And with the advent of digital, it was easier for us to make color pictures and to capture. We pretty quickly recruited Mimi and Dewey, who worked with us, and Alexandra came on 3 years ago. And we've all kind of shot our own way. And the methodology is, there's a little bit of method in our process, but some of it's just kind of intuitive. You learn how to do this. I'm a working journalist with some of my hats, and we all have a bit of that background. You try to cover all the places. I've photographed every single building in order, just like Google Maps, on the Pike. I need to do it again because it looks different. A couple summers ago. And we've gone into many of the businesses. Takis Karantonis at CPRO, Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization, helped us get in a lot of the businesses. Gone to churches, key leaders. I've walked up and down the streets. We had a project out of George Mason that sent us a few leads. And we just kind of went and did it. And the idea was to be as fair as possible. I mean, it's impossible. You can't be completely objective. There's no such thing, but you still try to do it anyway. You try to get as many different kinds of groups as you can. And then when we get to the point where what you're seeing now, the choices become aesthetic. They're based on, does the picture work? You know, the sociology makes for good sociology. It doesn't make for good art. And this is our way to communicate. You know, and I love that I can buy injera at gas stations, and you know, and it's been an interesting voyage. There are so many different types of people here now, and I think that's most important is that we've done it pretty well. That there are a lot of places on the earth where interethnic conflict creates, interethnic mixing causes great conflict. And here we've got, you name the group, they're here. And by and large, folks get along. You don't hear a lot of stories about the Somalis, you know, duking it out with the El Salvadorians on, you know, it doesn't happen. And I think that's a good thing. For whatever reason, we've managed to make it work here. I can conjecture about it, but, you know, again, I'm not a policy person. We just, you know, what's the old Dragnet show? He said, just the facts, ma'am. And we've tried to kind of do that within our way. There have been a lot of groups that we've collaborated with. This is actually Dewey's wedding. You just saw this Arlington, the Federal Credit Union. This is APA got me into this place, Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, who's been a great help because I could go to their openings, or we were having trouble accessing the Somali community for photography, and I just asked one of their resident, on-site workers, can you find me a Somali family that'd be willing to photograph? And they said, yeah, made it easy. You can't always just walk up to people on the street with a couple of big cameras. A lot of festivals, people are out. Snowmageddon. This is 7 years worth. We've also been trying to document a bit of the growth that's occurring, particularly at the end of the Pike. So far, that's towards the Pentagon. There's been real changes down there. And part of what we're doing is about that. Documentary photography purports to record a place and time, and we've actually done it for a long period of time, enough that the change is visible. We've slowed down a little bit of that. If any of you have been along the Pike recently, you might notice what's going on. In many parts of it, buildings are being put up. I hate this word. That's revealing my prejudices. The form-based code. They used to call it zoning. And, the code has the buildings right up to the road, certain height. It's consciously done. And that's a change, like it or not, for it, against it. That's what's coming. And we also are aware, Mary Briggs, who used to be one of the county's employees in the cultural department, told me about 4 or 5 years ago, I think that the ethnic diversity in Arlington has peaked. You know, and we are realizing that's part of our mix, is the changes that are coming again. And that was reiterated to me by Dahlia Constantine, a teacher at Patrick Henry, that her, you know, she says the lower grades are less diverse than the upper grades. Just as the, you know, because the folks who are living in this neighborhood are getting married, can't afford to live here, start families, and they're moving to South Arlington. It's, you know, it's an economic pressure. It's not good or bad, it's just what it is. And we're seeing those changes beginning to occur. That kind of stuff's hard to photograph, per se. There are a couple of pictures here and there in the mix. There's a young guy on a motor scooter that, to me, it's like, that's the change, you know. And some of them, like that Mr. Bui, he just said, I'm Vietnamese, I think. I know, you know. This is Sheikh Hamala, who's a Malian griot who played at Ethiopian Community Development Council event. He actually does a lot for them. Eddie Jenkins just passed away. He called himself Arlington's most experienced drummer. He was 97 or 95. Several of the pictures were made at an annual Flores Gambino large families, Latino family that's lived in Penrose since the 30s. They throw a huge Memorial Day bash every year, and we went. I'm friends with them, and and they have a pretty diverse group. I have a personal small connection with them. My grandfather, my mother's father, when he came to America, joined the Army around 1910, and was sent to fight Pancho Villa. And my friend Pete Durgan, who's in, her mother's Flores, said that we were talking one day. She's a musician, I know, and she said that her grandfather was Pancho Villa's clarinet player. And the way he ended up in Arlington was that he didn't want to be Pancho Villa's clarinet player. It was a good way to get hurt. He had been kind of drafted, and it was before we had the kind of regulations on the border we did, and he just walked into Texas and presented himself at an Army base, said, I'm a military musician, and they brought him in the Army band, and he was good, and they put him in the main Army band up here at Fort Myer. I also found an interesting thing from her brother, that the house that she lives in is made of this is a historical society, so I can say this, is made in the 30s when he was building. They were tearing down the stables that had been part of General Lee's. There's the Lee Custis Mansion. They're tearing the stable down, and he said, can I have the wood? And they said, sure, we're going to throw it out. So he built his house out of it. It's in Penrose. And you can't really see anything, but I just kind of like knowing that it's there. This is St. Patrick Henry School. It's a little karate school. This is also Patrick Henry. Some of these pictures are just a couple months old. On the street. This is the newer area of town. They keep building Irish bars. This is a blues festival. Dewey and I have both photographed this event. It's a Priyo Bangla. It's a huge Bangladeshi festival. It's around the first week of September. If any of you have a chance to go, it's amazing. And that's from it too. I mean, there were 3,000 people. There's a Bolivian festival that happened unheralded, and there were 3,000 dancers and about 3,000 people watching. It was stunning. I know about it because Cafe Saison, which is owned by a friend of ours who went through Paula's program, said, "Oh, you should go photograph this thing." And then coming up 4 Mile Run Drive, were 3,000 people, just totally covered in this amazing homemade costumes. The Bangla Festival, typical Arlington. One year I did it, the first dancers were Cambodian, Irish. Dewey's, when he did it, they were Appalachian step dance or cloggers, and that before they get to the Bangladeshi pop singers. I mean, that's just this area, and I think that's really something I really revel in. I think it's something, a strength of our community. This is the veterinarian on the Pike. He's the third vet there, or fourth. It's one of the older buildings on the Pike. He has actually some pictures of the Pike being, that area being built in the 30s. This is at the credit union. Also at the credit union. As outside that Oriental supermarket at Columbia Pike Plaza. This is opening of the Arlington Mill. Any questions? You all know about Columbia Pike? Okay, I also want to notice back in the back, Kathy Drew is here, Katie Drew, who's in the who's one of the people we photographed, and her husband Wayne, who we photographed also. And Katie's family's been here just a few generations, right? Okay, that's a while. This teacher here on the left, Dahlia Constantine, is we're doing a book, and we interviewed her for the book, and her husband for the book. She's Egyptian-born and partially raised, but mostly grew up in Los Angeles. Her husband's a local guy, but he was a badly wounded Iraq veteran. He was shot in the head, and he's the miracles of our surgeons. He survived and is doing okay. But she's a teacher at Patrick Henry, and she's arguably one of the best teachers I've ever seen in a classroom. But her classroom has 9 languages in it, 20 kids. And, that's what this area has. And one of the languages is American Sign Language. And we've learned to adapt here. And I wrote about this in books. Some of you that know me know this. I've been also working on a book on Jerusalem, where it's a city that has actually more than 2 ethnic groups, but 2 main ethnic groups. And they're not all that different. And they don't get along. That's an understatement. And here we have hundreds of groups, different historical situation, obviously. But we've made it work. And I think that's something that we should analyze and celebrate. I'm not entirely sure why it worked, but it certainly has, with relatively little conflict. And this is in a community where, Arlington, though we did break the color barrier back in the late 50s, broke the Jim Crow laws for schooling, broke massive resistance. We were also the head of, the home of the American Nazi Party. And I just recently, if any of you want to have some interesting time, there's an interesting Facebook page called I Grew Up in Arlington. And a lot of it's about over and over about Mario's Pizza or something, but there are some interesting things. And I saw a picture I didn't know of a young man, African-American man, sitting at a lunch counter in Arlington being harassed, in the late 50s by, white teenagers. And it looks like it was taken in Alabama at the same time, and it's here. So, something is transformed here. I can't imagine that happening now. This is the one I meant about the change. Wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago. We've been working with the Virginia Foundation for Humanities, also been very encouraging to us. And they're very concerned about food and starting a project on food culture. Unfortunately, Dave Behringer from the Humanities couldn't make it tonight, but he's been very helpful to us in that process. Some of these places are gone. It's a lot of the small businesses, particularly the restaurants, are pretty transitory. There's one block, I can't even remember the name of the shopping center, but where Brenner's used to be, the bakery, and the McDonald's, that block in between there, places change real fast. Yeah, between Walter Reed and Glebe. Those businesses turn over really quickly. There's one that I must photograph 8 times in 7 years. Different. It was an Ethiopian restaurant. It was a astrologer. It was Bolivian. I think it's Bolivian right now. This is a view from the Sheraton. It's hard to get a panorama of it. This is the other direction while they were knocking down the Navy buildings. This is a sucker picture. It was so beautiful. I could not help myself. This is, in the newer developments down by Penrose. Sure.
Your photography is stunning. It's wonderful photography. Are you preparing this for a book?
Yeah, the book's in process. We're pretty close to being done. We're waiting on an essay to come in. We've been waiting on it for a while. So far, I've written a piece. The book is divided in some ways, much like this slideshow, by photographer. We each have our own way of doing things. I don't see the way Mimi does, or Paula, Alexandra, or Dewey, and we want everybody to speak for themselves. So it's by section. And there's an essay by Dave Barringer. There's a pretty significant piece by a Brookings Institution scholar named Audrey Singer, who wrote a piece several years ago called World in a Zip Code, about the 22204 zip code, which constitutes the Pike. And she and a Dr. Marie Price of GW, they're both demographers, have written a piece for us. We're waiting on a piece from Takas. So, yeah, we're just doing caption material. With a few photos, we'll have some interviews. Paula, there's a couple of people that have been interviewed, Pastor Nicholas, McBeeb, Gibbert Sadek, a few others. I just interviewed Katie, and a few others, just to give a touch of it. The book will be, we're publishing, but we're teaming with UVA Press, who've been very helpful. They'll be distributing it, because otherwise it just sits in a box in my house. And there's a lot of pieces to this. We want it actually to be part of the community. Emma Violan Sanchez on the school board has been very helpful and supportive. We're going to be talking shortly to curriculum specialists within the county. The idea is to use the book as a resource material. And, it's a pretty book, but that sells 50 books, and we want it to get out there. We would like to find some way to fund a full exhibition that can travel. Some of the pictures are up in CPRO's office, but they're local. Arlington has sister cities. There are other communities that have similar situations to us, and it's a way to share what we've done with them. We also, Violan Sanchez, feels very strongly as an immigrant herself that this is a way of celebrating who we are and our diversity and the pride. Particularly, many of the immigrants came here, fleeing real trouble. They didn't come because it was nice where they were. At least two of our photographers are immigrants. I think Paula's family's been here the longest. I think her grandparents came from Japan around 1900. My father's an immigrant, and two of our photographers. That's just who we are here. We had a handful of interns also. Yes, sir.
I believe the Pike is 200 years old.
Yes.
Since you've been looking at the Pike for such a long time, could you talk a little bit about the 19th century history of the Pike?
I know a little bit.
Are there historic photos that you're planning to integrate into your own photos?
There won't be in the book. We've looked at a lot of that work. One of the the Pike's 200th year was 2010, and there was a really good piece done on the history of the Pike by the county historian. And it's really quite extensive. And my favorite is they have the cost of the tolls. It's like you have 5 cows, you got to pay a penny and a half. It's like that kind of detail. And it was because the major route out of the district to Virginia, points west and south, was Columbia, over Long Bridge, which is today 14th Street Bridge. If you really want to get that stuff in detail, I assume the people in the Historical Society know Sarah Collins. I wish I could just put a microphone up into her brain and download what she knows. My favorite little Pike story from her is that Abe Lincoln apparently liked to come to a particular encampment along the Pike It was of German-speaking Union soldiers, and instead of drinking whiskey and acting sloppy, they drank beer, and their camp was in good shape, and he wanted the Union Army to look like that, and he would go visit them. And I thought, what a neat story. I also didn't know there was a POW camp, right off George Mason in World War II for German prisoners. And there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a little beyond our purview that I'm interested in. I have found there's a number of pictures, not that many, around there. There are people still alive who remember the Pike being a dirt road, at least when we started this. There was a gentleman who was baptized around 1918 on the Pike, and he was saying, yeah, it used to be dirt once you got past what's today Walter Reed. They didn't pave the whole thing until, the 20s. It was quite, I looked at a picture from the Lake Barkoff Dam from about 1920. You'd think you were way out in the country. It really, I have a former student whose family owned property kind of behind where Brenner's is. They owned a farm there, and they're very southern people. And that was his grandfather. It wasn't that long ago. The change happened very quickly. Some of that's been documented. I know there's a nice little piece just came out on Arlington Village that was done, oral histories. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. That's a little, that becomes bigger than we can do. What we know we can do is what's here now. I'm not really a historian. I'm interested in it, but I'm a contemporary documentary person. It becomes history at some point because it stops, and then things change. And there's a piece today on the Arlington Facebook page. Grew up in Arlington. They had did any of you been here long enough to remember Pearlie's truck? Used to be a truck driving around Arlington covered in license plates. We all used to see it. We all used to know it, and nobody remembers it. But at the time, it was just, it was always here. So I saw a hand up over here, ma'am.
I'm having the feeling that if you were doing a documentary on Roslyn-Ballston corridor, you would be talking about people who have are not property owners, and I'm assuming the same is true on Columbia Pike. Can you talk about whether these people become resident owners and where they go, or
That's a good question.
Some part of Arlington?
Yeah, I'm not an economist. I can tell you for sure that affordable housing in Arlington is disappearing. We're hemorrhaging it. It's not just slipping away. It's just disappearing rapidly. I'm not sure. That's a policy question, but I think the Pike has got a lot of rental property. There are the neighborhoods that are sort of the next tier back, a block or two away. Those are mostly owned, single-family homes. As you get back away from the Pike a little bit, but all the garden apartments there's a few of them are condo. When I know some of the new buildings that have been put in that were meant to be condo, they couldn't sell them, and they're renting. And it's a mix. I think eventually they're going to be more and more condo. I know that just anecdotally, looking at what I see on the Pike, some of the things that used to just be happening on the Pike are now happening further out. They're in Bailey's and Springfield, Woodbridge. If you go to Woodbridge, it looks really diverse. It didn't a few years ago. It's an economic push. So what happened in Arlington is it was affordable, it was safe, and we had good schools, and it was a welcoming environment. The economics are changing. So I can't tell you what percentage is rental, which is not. I actually have those numbers at home, but I don't, and they're in the last census. I don't have the current census data, but the Pike itself is pretty heavily rental and has been for a long time. A lot of the stuff, if you actually go online and ask the right questions of Google, you can get those answers. Again, I try to emphasize, we're not policy people. We're culture workers. You know, I have strong feelings about certain political things and certain trends, as do the other photographers, but that's not what we're here. Our job is to, like, this is what we find in front of us. This is what we find interesting. There's a John Sirkowski, who used to be the curator at the Museum of Modern Art, likened the act of photography to essentially being a mute pointing. It means, look at this, I find this interesting. And this is a collection of what we found interesting. And can we be objective? There's no such thing. And even if you really tried to be more scientific, to give you my background, I tried to write a program in the 1970s to define where consciousness entered the photographic process. Okay, I was pretty goofy. And it can't be done, but it's an inherently an intuitive process. I liken it to Picasso's line, art is a lie that tells the truth. All theater is a lie. All of this is a lie. But photography has the unique property of, when done the way we're doing it, that there's a direct relationship between what you point the camera at and what happened in front of it. And we read that. It's a little tricky with digital because, you know, people know that we can manipulate and can manipulate heavily. These pictures, the manipulations, are primarily similar, the equivalent of darkroom. We're lightening things, we're darkening things, we're fixing the color balance, we might crop here and there. But they're pretty much true to what happened in front of the camera. You know, there's other ways to make pictures. We had some funding. The initial funding came from the Virginia Foundation for Humanities. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to get us going. Paula Endo wrote those grants. I got a grant from the Arlington Commission for the Arts. We got a couple of small grants from the Community Foundation. The rest of it, we just did it. You know, we've gotten some, we just thought it was the right thing to do. To raise the money for the book, we did the conditions for getting money from the Virginia Foundation. I would have had to write another master's degree, and there were enormous stipulations, and they wouldn't let us use a commercial press, which means the book would have been in a box. So we raised the money ourselves through crowdfunding. Those of you who know me got an awful lot of emails, but we raised the money, and hopefully it'll be out soon. And we think the book is the way to share it. The main thing that, there's a blog called pikedoc.org, pikedoc.org, and we have a Facebook page. Look us up and like us. And that blog is regularly updated, a little less so of late, but there's quite a lot of activity on it. The downside with a blog is it's time bound. You know, you can't easily search through the whole thing. You have to go back month by month by month. But there's an enormous amount of material there if you want to look at it. I mean, thousands and thousands of pictures. One other outcome is one nice thing with digital, all of the work is going to go to the county here. It's going to be tricky because it fills up about half a terabyte on a hard drive, and I've got to figure a way to download it. They don't have Macs here, and there's some formatting issues, but we'll figure that out. To give you an idea of how this stuff becomes meaningful over time, this past weekend, there was a historic plaque put up for Green Valley Pharmacy down in Green Valley for Dr. Muse. And pictures I took of him in 1980 with John Robinson are on the plaque, and I was kind of amused and enjoyed the fact that I'd never had pictures on a historical plaque. And there were a lot of people there. It was a nice event. And, you know, those pictures, which at the time, those were found, somebody searched, you know, our archive in the library and said, oh, you have this, is it useful? And some of the work we did from 35 years ago is, you know, scholars occasionally will write an article and they have access to it. But getting it into the, you know, into the library, the public has use of it. If it's commercial use, they have to call us and pay us. But if it's public use, scholarly use, that kind of thing, we're happy to share. Some of the work we did years ago was in that WETA piece about Arlington. They tended to pick kind of silly stuff, but it was nice that it was available. And it's in a central location. One of the things that happens with photographs is that lots of people make them, but it's hard to put them in one place. Our stuff's organized, keyworded. Even Alexander Dewey, I've put all that mess inside your pictures. You can't see it, but each one of these pictures has when it's taken, who took it, probably the address where it's taken. It may have the name of the person who's in it, so that's useful for the future. That's embedded inside the picture. It's not visible, but there are programs that'll extract that information easily. That one with the Bolivian one I just love. Dr. Tefera, ECDC. Another Irish bar. Quibui.
Yes, Mr. Wolf, I was interested that you are going to be doing a book, and I'm hoping that you will put specific addresses for the businesses, because otherwise it gets lost to history and it becomes, they did that with the book on Arlington, and it may as well just be a picture book up on the shelf.
It'll say things like, it varies from photo to photo. I'm trying to think of it. It'll say 2900 block, stuff like that. It'll have the name of the business.
Specific. Historians in the future scholars will thank you for that.
Yeah, the individual portraits, that one will say Pike Pizza. The real stuff is actually going to be in the historical archives, and that stuff is much more extractable than the book. I mean, there's also problems if you fill up a book with too much stuff, nobody wants to read it. It's not a history book. It's not a history book. It's a picture book with some, we want it to be meaningful to the general public, kids, adults, artists, general public. Dewey and Alexander have heard me say this 100 times. You need to be eloquent in the language that of the people you're speaking to. I know how to make pictures, we all do, all the 5 of us know how to make pictures that are interesting to photographers. Yeah, they're place names. Like, that one, not that it's in the book, that one would probably say Health Fair, Buchanan Gardens. Buchanan Gardens is easy to find. Doesn't take a lot of searching. I mean, the web allows, sometimes when I'm doing the research for the captions in the book, I've forgotten the address. I just go I'll write Buchanan Gardens on the web and boom, up comes the address. Or I can go into my own stuff. It's a very different creature. It's not a card catalog. I mean, it varies. Some of them are very specific, the addresses. I mean, I just added today to Dewey's thing that he shot a beautiful picture of this crazy orange sky, and he said, no, it's 5100 South 8th Street, not just South 8th Street. So I added it. Matt got that. Or the book is at the designer, and there are a lot of pieces to it. There are a lot of dots to be, a lot of T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted still. And we're hoping we haven't figured out how to put a map in it. The Pike is long and narrow. It's hard to fit on a book. We'll probably do the end papers with a map. For us, it's about the community. It's about the people who are in it. Otherwise, it's, there are photography books out there that just show place. They look like a neutron bomb went off, right? It's just an empty building. That's interesting, but it's the people who live in the building that make the community. Mostly, though. If you ask, I'm not so sure how happy he is, but it varies a little bit. My personal take is if you look at the portraits I've done, I'm often criticized for making people looking somber. And in my own personal life, the pictures of my immediate family, I want pictures of my daughter and granddaughter smiling. But I don't think when somebody's smiling at you, they're actually revealing very much. You actually get the more I mean, he's not smiling. Though I just love how he looks. You know, this guy's going, who's that guy with the camera? But it varies. You know, I've seen that dog there a lot. So I don't know if you can see there's nails there. This is Arlington. Pat Bond is a Mongolian rocket scientist. Okay, where but Arlington, you know. I mean, these are our neighbors, and that's really what we've tried to do. And in some extent, what we've created is an extended, curated family album, as honestly as we could do it. I was asked earlier if I'm a scientist. I'm not. I'm an artist or a culture worker. And there's science and art have relationships, and that you're exploring things and trying to uncover, but they're not the same. The methodology is extremely different. My closest friend is a research engineer. My father was a research engineer. I know what science is. I'm not that, and the rest of us aren't either. You know, Dewey, do you want to say anything about what you've done? Or Alexandra, come on up. Come on. These people are good at what they do.
I don't know what to say.
Just say something.
I'm kind of an aesthetic opportunist, and I just go out looking for things to shoot. Have you ever had any problems shooting people? It looks so easy when you just...
Yeah, sometimes people.
I mean, I know I get intimidated seeing people shoot me, and I was like...
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, sometimes people give you a hard time.
could I tell a story, or is that...
Tell the story.
All right. So I was right down the street from my house shooting this bus going by. I was about to shoot the picture, but the bus turned its lights off because it was off duty. And I didn't get a chance to shoot the picture because the lights went out. There's no lights to expose the picture. But the guy came out and started yelling at me. He's like, "Erase that picture." I was like, "I never took the picture." And I just started, he started running after me, so I just dashed off because I was freaking out. And my brother was with me, but as he was chasing me, my flash fell out of my pocket and landed on the ground, and he held it for ransom, and I had to come back. It was kind of scary. He took me back to the bus, and he locked me inside the bus with my brother. Yeah. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, I had all the rights to do this. I'm in public. This is public transportation. There shouldn't be a problem, but this guy had a big problem with me shooting. And I said, "I never took the picture." And he's like, "Show me the picture. Delete it." I said, "I never took it." He's like, "Oh, that's convenient." So he's like, "I'm going to call my supervisor, and you wait here, and you're going to be in trouble." I was like, "Fine, I'll wait, because I know I'm right. There's no problem with what I'm doing." But it was pretty upsetting. That was for this project. But I eventually got my flash back. The supervisor came and was like, "What? That's not a problem. You go, scram." So that was really scary. I didn't shoot a while after that. I got scared of shooting buses. I would approach people and ask them, if it was okay to photograph them, and I would really sort of make an event out of it and bring my studio lights and stuff to the actual location, and just, that was the only way for me to make them feel comfortable and maybe make a more exciting picture than just capturing documentary type. You do, but then there's ways I do it where it makes it look, genuine.
Okay. Alexandra, do you have anything you want to share? Or? This is Alexandra La Cueva.
Well, sorry. The most, I guess, memorable experience of photographing for Columbia Pike documentary project was at Randolph Elementary School?
Yeah.
Or middle school? I think it was
Elementary.
elementary school. We had a lot of people dressed in different costumes, and in a way it was like very, very, like Columbia Pike thing. You see people from everywhere, and they're with children and dressed in their national costumes. It was really exciting. Otherwise, I'm a foreigner, so I came to this country a few years ago, and so to see how this diversity works together, it's not yet completely urbanized, where everybody's blended completely, where people still wear, traditional clothes and eat their food, and that's very, not bizarre, but really, really intriguing, and nothing you can help like just looking at everything. It's so exciting.
Tonight in the little article that I'm going to write about this event, I took 7 pictures of you, and I've already deleted one. I assume that you take a lot of pictures, far more pictures than for every one of these.
Just to give you an idea, when Dewey, I edited his stuff recently. He shot the Priyo Bangla Festival. He turned in like 2,200 pictures, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, with the first cut, I knocked 1,000 off right away. I mean, just threw them away. And then I think I edited it down to about 500, and we put like 50 up on the site. I mean, that's the nature of this business. I get pretty brutal even with my own work. It's hard. But there's a line from kind of a difficult photographer, but brilliant, named Larry Clark, who told me once that to make a great piece, you have to get rid of good stuff. You know, and it's hard. You know, when I have more trouble with that with the writing. I did a piece and I sent it off to Dave Barringer, and he took a chainsaw to it, and it's better after he got done with it. This is, even though this is long, this is just a tip of the iceberg of what we have. It's a huge volume. I have no idea. I could figure it out, but it's in the 10, 50, 80,000. I have no idea how many pictures are in there. And since we prepare them, both, some of them are raw files, some of them are unprocessed JPEGs, then I create a reproduction file, a slideshow file for these things, and one for web use. I mean, the numbers get bigger. But it's a lot of work, and I think it's going to be over the next century that this work really starts to have meaning. And we have our own, to me, I have to say, I have to stand behind a piece of work and go, as an artist, this communicates something that's meaningful to me, that I want to share. And that sometimes has a little different twist to it than, well, this is the only picture we have of this shoe store, period. There's a picture I took in Green Valley 35 years ago of a guy who happens to be aesthetically strong, but it was of a shoe store owner or a shoe repairman. And it's like the only shot of his shop, and that, his family's come to me, a couple of people doing work in Knock have come to me because of it. Nobody else put it together, And I think if you're not conscious about it, it just slips away. I'm very, the work that was done in the United States in the late 30s by the Farm Security Administration photographers, where a conscious effort was made to document the country in the Roosevelt era, in the New Deal. It was shut down by budget hawks, but it's probably the most important record of the whole country knows those pictures. If I flashed them up here, you would know them. And it was consciously done. Walker Evans was the main guy. He was a good photographer himself. That's an understatement. And it has great meaning. It was consciously collected. And the work we did before for NEA was under a conscious program that was community-based rather than nationally based to create localized historical projects. Lots of them were done. There's only one book about all that was done at the time. We've consciously done this here. Why we do it, I don't know. I just find that my own community is a pretty ripe ground for viewing. The 70s feminist line, the personal is political, means a lot to me. That if you get too far afield, it's not something you know.
You were saying that someone told you that the county was changing, like it's not as diverse now. Do you see the Pike in maybe another 10 years, a lot of these places are going to be gone, a lot of these people will be gone, and it'll be more generic or kind of upscale shops?
I have a guess. Go walk into Ballston. That's what the Pike's going to look like in 20 years. And the county's doing it on purpose, for right or wrong. But that's what it's going to look like. A little different. We don't have metro. It won't be quite as dense. but, buildings up to, they won't be quite as tall as Ballston, but tall buildings right up to the road. The idea is walkable, urban, but that's what it's going to look like. The garden apartments set back a ways, that's going to start to disappear. I mean, every time I talk to Takas, I discover there's something else coming. Do you know where the Goodwill is? Where the B&Es used to have their place that's now Tudomasu, that used to be something else, it used to be something else. That's going to be a 4-story building right up to the road, no affordable apartments soon, in the area where like Rappahannock Coffee is, that's going to come, up in that area. There's some other buildings coming in. I can't remember how high, 4 or 6 stories. But that's what's coming. They're not going to be quite as big as here, but that's coming. And I suspect that, the character of the community visually is going to change. I'm not sure that's entirely bad, but the people who, my guess is just the economics of it are going to change radically who lives here in our neighborhood.
I hope you make some record of trees, because as in Roslyn-Ballston corridor on Columbia Pike, only the county will own trees. And they are the street trees that are able to live without very much light.
That's a good point. Both Dewey and I have taken, and I don't know about, there's one picture of Alexander's that actually has a whole bunch of trees in the background. But there was a point right around where 4 Mile Run drives in that both of us have photographed. I'm kind of a country boy at heart, even though I haven't lived there very much in my life. It's important to me. But we haven't done that in a conscious way. That's actually a pretty good idea. I think would be, a pop-up of, there's not many right along the Pike, but there's stuff nearby. It's an interesting point of view. And there's a gentleman, and this, we need to be done after that.
I think I heard that your pictures are indexed only by address, not by subject. Okay,
No.
please.
You're ascribing much too methodical a process, though I am the child of a German-Jewish engineer, and I have learned a bit to do that. They vary a lot. Generally, each folder, each shoot, each session is in a folder. That folder will be labeled CPDP, Buchanan Street Gardens opening, 11/4/12, DT, Deweytron, or LW. Within that, the titles may vary, each image. If it's the Bangladeshi festival, it'll all say Priyo Bangla 2014, etc. Sometimes if it's a business that we shot 5 businesses in a day, each business will say, shoe store, dentist, kebab house. And inside of that picture, in the metadata, will be the name of the owner, the address, their website, their phone. That's buried, but it's in the picture. And I've used it on a regular basis. I don't have Sarah Collins in my contact list. Every time I look her up, I have to go find her photograph, open it up, and read the metadata. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't have a real good program for it, but there are numerous programs that'll mine that for you. I can actually, my Mac I can just type in the name and find out which picture. It'll just pull up all the pictures in the search for me. And there are archiving programs that are quite powerful for doing that. I'm not an archivist, but I want to be able to make the work accessible to an archivist. And I know the more you write, and I know we just had this with Dewey. I needed him to give me some captions for a grocer he photographed, and he couldn't remember everybody's name. Luckily, I had written it down at the time, put it in the picture, and was able to pull it up, because 4 or 5 years later, you get sketchy. It's human nature. Okay, thank you all very much. And I'm not sure, but is this young gentleman somebody I just photographed into school at Patrick Henry?